There is a well in Xianxia Lane, named Tiansuo Well. An iron chain, as thick as a young arm, hangs in the wellhead year after year. When there is such a well with such an iron lock, and who does such a boring and strange thing? No one knows the truth for a long time. Even the oldest old man in the town can tell his ugly yin mao. It is said that there was a good man in the town who tried to test the length of the iron chain, despite the dissuasion of the old people. He didn't take seriously the old rule that every foot of the iron lock out of the wellhead loses 1 year of life. As a result, he pulled a stick of incense hard and pulled out a lot of iron chains, but he still didn't see the end. The man was exhausted, so he let the chains pulled out of the wellhead curl around the wheel of the well and said he would come back tomorrow. He just didn't believe in this evil. When he got home, he bled in his 7 orifices that day and died in bed. No matter how hard his family tried, the body just couldn't close his eyes. Finally, an old man who lived near the well for generations asked the family to carry the body to the well and watch the old man put those chains back to the well. When the whole chain was straightened again and sank into the deep water at the wellhead, the body finally closed its eyes. An old man and a young man walked slowly to the iron log well. The little guy was a child with 2 slugs hanging. But speaking of this story, he spoke clearly and methodically. He didn't look like a rural child who had only been in school for half a year. At this time, the child was looking up with big eyes, like 2 black grapes. He gently sniffed, and the 2 slug snakes retracted. The child looked at the storyteller with the big white bowl in one hand, no mouth, and said, "When I'm finished, you should show me what's in your bowl." The old man smiled and said, Don't worry. Wait until you sit down by the well, and then I'll show you enough." The child's kindness reminded, "Don't go back on your word, or you'll die easily. You'll fall into it as soon as you get to the iron log well. At that time, I won't pick up your body, otherwise I'll thunder suddenly and just cut you into a piece of coke. At that time, I'll take a stone and break it a little." The old man listened to the child pouring beans in a bamboo tube and a large string of vicious and unlucky words without repetition. He had a headache and hurriedly said, "I'm sure I'll show you. By the way, who did you learn these words from?" The child cut the nail and cut the railway. "Follow my mother." The old man sighed. "It is worthy of being outstanding and beautiful." The child suddenly stopped, frowned and said, "Don't you swear. I know some people like to say good words in reverse, such as Song Jackson." The old man quickly denied it, then cut off the topic and asked, "Do some strange things often happen in the town?" The child nodded. The old man asked, "Tell me." The child pointed to the old man and said solemnly, "For example, you carry a big white bowl and won't let someone put copper money in." Before you finish the story, my mother said that you're not bad and confused. It seems that you're used to cheating. So let me send you a few when. Don't live or die. What's in the bowl? The old man can't cry or laugh. It turned out that the storyteller who had finished the story under the old locust tree asked the child to take him to Xianxia Lane to see the will at first. The child was not happy. The old man said that his big white bowl was exquisite and filled with rare things. The child was naturally lively and active. His parents said that he forgot to have a long ass when he was born. He liked to wander around with Liu Xianyang's vagrants when he was very young, but in order to catch a eel or loach, the little boy could also expose himself to the sun for half an hour. He was motionless and had amazing patience. So when the old man said what was in the white bowl, the child immediately took the bait. Even if the old man made a strange request at the beginning and said he would try to mention him to see how heavy he was, he wanted to know if he weighed 40 kilograms. The child nodded and agreed without hesitation. Anyway, he would lose a piece of meat if he mentioned it a few times. But it happened that the child turned his eyes again and again. The old man holding the bowl in the palm of his left hand raised him 5 or 6 times with his right hand, but he failed to lift him up once. The child finally glanced at the old man's thin arms and legs, shook his head and thought it was a thimble. Champion and S poor man had more strength than the old man. Just thinking that he hasn't seen the thing in the white bowl yet. He seems to be a child born with early enlightenment, so he endured not saying some words that would make the old man feel embarrassed. You know, in the area of PPM Lane and Xinhua Lane, when talking about quarrels and swearing, especially the strange talk of yin and yang, this child can rank third. The second is the scholar Song Dixon, and the first is the child's mother. The old man came to the well, but did not sit at the wellhead. The ancient well is stacked with green bricks. Invisible. The old man breathed heavily. The child walked to the well, turned his back to the wellhead, jumped back, and just sat on the wellhead. This scene made the old man sweating. If he wasn't careful, the rabbit would fall directly. It's difficult to collect the corpse based on the historical origin of this ancient well. The old man walked forward slowly, narrowed his eyes, bent over and looked at the iron lock. One tied at the bottom of the well wheel. Feng Shui Resort, the inner continent. The old man looked around with mixed feelings and thought, I don't know who will spend this heavy weapon in the end. The old man stretched out his free left hand and stared at the palm of it. Palm pattern, modeled and complex. There is a brand new line, which is slowly extending, like a crack from the collapse of porcelain. God and man look at palms like mountains and rivers. It's just that the old man is just looking at himself. The old man frowned and exclaimed, not in just half a day. It's such a bleak scene. Aren't you? The child was already standing on the wellhead, with one hand on his hips and one finger pointing to the old man, and urged loudly, will you show me the white ball or not? The old man said reluctantly, hurry down, I'll show you the big white ball. The child was skeptical and finally jumped down the wellhead. The child was skeptical and finally jumped down the wellhead. The old man hesitated for a moment and looked solemn. Baby, you and I are destined to show you the mystery of this ball. But after reading it, you're not allowed to mention it to outsiders. Even your mother. If you can do it, I will let you see it. If you can't do it, you will be stabbed in the spine by your baby and won't show you half an eye. The child blinked. Let's go. The old man solemnly walked forward to the wellhead and bowed his head. He found that the rabbit had changed his face and sat on the wellhead. The old man regretted that he had provoked the lawless baby. The old man restrained his thoughts. Facing the wellhead, grabbed the bottom of the big white ball with his 5 fingers, and the palm began to tilt slightly, with an almost undetectable range. The child felt that he had been waiting for a long time, but he didn't see any movement in the white ball above his head, and the old man always maintained that position. Just before the child's slugs are about to come to his mouth and his patience is exhausted, I saw a stream of water with thick and thin fingers pouring out of the white bowl and falling into the deep water well without a sound. When a child bares his teeth, he will scold. He suddenly shut his mouth and was surprised. A moment later, the child's face had changed from shock to loss. Then, the child began to be afraid, suddenly recovered, jumped down the wellhead and fled to his home. It turned out that the amount of water the old man poured into the well with the white bowl had long been more than a large water tank. But there was always water pouring out of the white bowl. The child felt that he must have gone to hell. Liu Xiaoyang broke a newly sprouted branch from the roadside and began to practice his sword. The whole person was like a rolling wheel, spinning wildly. He didn't care about the new boots on his feet, and countless dust was raised on the path. When the tall boy left the town, he walked north and south, as long as he walked through the corridor bridge built by Lord Song, and then walked 3 or 4 miles. He came to the blacksmith shop run by Ruan's father and daughter. In fact, Liu Xiaoyang has always been arrogant, but Master Ruan only used one word to make the boy admire. We're here only to open the furnace and forge a sword. It's good to forge a sword. Liu Xiaoyang couldn't help getting excited when he thought he would have a real sword in the future. He lost the branch, then began to cry while running. Liu Xiaoyang thought about the boxing frames taught by Master Ruan in private, and began to practice. He was like a tiger and a tiger. Teenagers are getting closer and closer to the corridor bridge. On the steps at the north end of the corridor bridge, there were 4 people, graceful, plump, and beautiful women, holding up waving red robes in his arms. He raised his chin like a general who had just won a great victory. At the other end of the steps, there was a tall old man covered with frost and snow. The old man was whispering to comfort an angry little girl. She was carved with pink jade, like the most exquisite porcelain doll in the world. Her tender skin is crystal clear in the sun, so that she can clearly see the veins under the skin. The two children had just finished their quarrel. The little girl wanted to cry, and the little boy became more and more proud. The old man was burly, like a hill. The woman next to him threw an apology in his eyes, which the dignified old man ignored. At the bottom of the steps stood a young man surnamed Lu, who was the eldest grandson of Lu's family leader. His name was Lu Jianjun. Maybe he was a real person who could raise a person. People born and raised in the small town always had better skin appearance than men and women elsewhere. However, Lu Jianjun had long been hollowed out by wine and lust, and fell into the eyes of the four people sitting on the steps, which was even worse. The Leng Yao owned by the Lu family is superior to the small town in both number and scale. It is also a surname with the largest number of children of the family going out of the small town to open branches and spread leads in other places. However, Lu Jianchun, who used to be very powerful in the small town, looked stiff and pale. The whole person was tense. It seemed that if there was a slight mistake, he would be copied and killed by the 9 families. The boy said what the people in the town didn't understand. "Mom, this little bug surnamed Liu is really the one from his ancestors." When he was about to say his name, the woman immediately covered the child's mouth. "How many times did your father tell you before going out? You can easily name anyone here." The boy broke off the woman's hand. His eyes were hot, and asked in a low voice, "Does his family really inherit the treasure armor and sword sutra from generation to generation?" The woman fondled the young son's head and said softly, "Lu guaranteed with half of the genealogy that the 2 things are still hidden in the young man's house." The boy suddenly coquettishly said, Mom, can we exchange the treasure with Xiaobai family? The treasure armor we planned is really ugly. Mom, if you think about it, you can fly the sword to take the head in your dream. It's really invisible. Isn't it much more powerful than a turtle shell?" Before the woman could explain the reason, the girl next door said angrily, "Yes, because you want to get involved in our long-lost treasure of the town. This time we are here to return the goods to their original owners. Unlike some shameless guys, we are robbers, thieves, and even beggars." The boy turned his head and made a grimace, then sneered, "Smelly girl, you said it yourself. The treasure of the mountain in the town, it's just the generation of the mountain gate. It's amazing." The boy suddenly changed. His smiling face stood up from the woman's arms and looked down at the little girl with pity, as if the schoolmaster was scolding the childish child. "Dao lives forever, acts against the sky, and only competes for words. You don't even understand this truth. How can you inherit your family property in the future? And how can you abide by the ancestral teachings? You descendants of Zhenyang Mountain, descendants of all generations, must live Zhenyang Mountain at least 100 feet every 30 years. Smelly girl, do you think it's easy from your grandfather to your father?" The little girl lost her momentum and looked depressed. She hung her head and didn't dare to face the boy. The burly old man covered with frost and snow said in a deep voice, "Madam, although children's words are not taboo, if you harm my little master's heart, you can weigh the consequences yourself." With a charming smile, the woman pulled the gloomy young son back to her arms and said, "It's just a quarrel between the children. Why should the ape master go on the line like this? Don't ruin the millennium friendship between our 2 families." Never thought that the old man had a very strong temper. So he went back and said, "I am Zhenyang Mountain, which has been open for 2,600 years. I have gratitude for kindness, although I haven't forgotten it for thousands of years. I have resentment for resentment, and never have overnight revenge." The woman smiled and did not fight for spirit. This trip to the town is a heavy responsibility for everyone, especially her. She gambled all her life, her son's future, and her mother's family. Although the woman is plain in clothes, she looks graceful. However, the people in the town have not seen the world and do not know the secret of it. From beginning to end, Lu Jianchun always turned his back to the steps of the corridor bridge. The first time I saw these distinguished guests in the Lushi mansion before, my brother was just young and energetic. and he didn't have enough concentration. Then he temporarily forgot his grandfather's warning. He couldn't help glancing at the beautiful woman's chest. He was dragged down by his trembling grandfather and killed him in the courtyard, as if his mouth was stuffed with cotton cloth during execution. So Lu Jianchun, who continued to accompany his grandfather in the lobby, could neither hear his brother's sad cry nor see the flesh and blood blurred picture. After the negotiation, Lu Jianchun went out to look for the young man surnamed Liu. When Lu Jianchun stepped out of the threshold of the lobby, he found that the blood in the courtyard had already been cleaned. The four guests who came from afar, even the children who were like golden boys and girls, were no different from this, as if this was a matter of course. At that moment, Lu Jianchun was a little confused. How can a dead man be worse than a dead dog? What's more, the man's surname is Lu. When drinking with his brother late the night before, he was very happy. He said that he must prosper and shine on the lintel in the future. The two brothers will no longer be frogs at the bottom of the well and work together to break a world outside. Lu Jianchun's mind was still blank until he walked out of the Lu family's mansion. After that, Lu Jianchun began to feel fear. When strangers ask questions, his voice will tremble, and when he leads the way, his steps will be erratic. He knows that he is like this, which will make a fool of himself, disappoint his grandfather, and shame his family. However, young people can't control their fear, as if his whole body is seeping cold from his bones. At the end of last year's Lunar New Year, my grandfather took their brothers into a secret room and told them a message. The Lu family will soon work for some noble people. It is a great blessing. We must be careful. If it is done, the Lu family will turn the reward into a stepping stone for cultivating the two brothers. As long as the noble people are willing to learn, there will be a Yangguan Avenue under their brothers' feet in the future, make progress, and finally achieve unimaginable prosperity. At that time, he understood why he and his brother needed to learn so many strange dialects since childhood. Lu Jianchun looked at Liu Xianxia, who was getting closer and closer to the corridor bridge. He suddenly began to hate this man. This poor man who had been blocked in the alley by himself was lying on the ground like a dead dog. If a little bastard didn't run to the corner of the alley and shout for the dead, he and several close friends had been going to take off their pants according to the agreement. Give a shower to the young man on the ground who doesn't appreciate it. Up to now, Lu Jianchun still doesn't understand why these high-ranking dignitaries look at Liu Xiaoyang with no eyes. As for that so-called treasure armor, Sword Sutra, Zhanyang Mountain, Changshan Avenue, and competing for opportunities and gas luck, Lu Jianchun seems to understand, but in fact, he doesn't understand. But Lu Jianchun can be sure of one thing, that is, he hopes Liu Xiaoyang will die here. As for the real reason, Lu Jianchun did not dare to admit it and did not want to think deeply. Deep down in his heart, Lu Jianchun absolutely doesn't want Liu Xiaoyang, who is as humble as a dog, to see that his rich and delicious Lu family is reduced to a bird surnamed Liu. There is no greater humiliation than this. The beautiful woman looked at Li and murmured, "Here we are." The tall boy punched all the way. Later, he punched rapidly and hit faster and faster, so that the boy's body was coerced by the fist, and some stumbled out in the eyes of experts. The fist idea, which has begun to take shape, has revealed the Da Chang style of combining hardness and softness. Along the way of martial arts, there is an entry-level formula, the true meaning of no boxing. A century-old layman, once you understand the true meaning of boxing, you can fight ghosts and gods for 10 years. The beautiful woman was relieved. Sure enough, this young man surnamed Liu was the one they were looking for. He was really talented, even in their immortal family residences. His bone qualification should not be underestimated. Of course, in the vast world of beautiful women and burly white-haired people, it is this kind of people who have the largest number. The beautiful woman stood up and said to Lu Jianchun at the bottom of the steps, "Go and tell the young man what he wants before you are willing to take out the family heirlooms, armor and books." When Lu Jianchun turned around, he bowed down and replied, "Yes, madam." The woman said calmly, "Remember, when you talk to the young man, be gentle and pay attention to propriety. The boy stretched out his finger, condescended, and said sternly, "If something bad happens, I will strip you of your skin and cramp, refine your soul into a wick, and ask you to live all the time before the light goes out." Though Jiang Chun was so frightened that he excited himself, he bent down more and said in panic, "Villains will never delay things." The little girl finally felt that she had pulled back the city and said with a sneer, "In front of these ordinary people, it's full of prestige. I don't know who was scolded as a wild saved by the people in the same way on the way, and I didn't dare to fight back." The burly old man actually felt very bad about the snobbish mother and son from the beginning, so he added, "Mrs. Wrong, where is it that you dare not fight back? It is clear that you dare not fight back." The boy in a bright red robe clenched his teeth and stared at the girl. His face was gloomy, but there was no cruel words uttered at last. He showed his face and smiled brightly. The woman's eyes are always on the road ahead, and her face is calm. God knows whether she has a grudge or not. With a cold hum, the little girl ran down the steps, squatted by the stream, and looked down at the swimming fish in the water. Occasionally, groups of carp swam in her sight, with varying numbers, both red and green, when chatting under the old locust tree. Some elderly people in a small town often said that when they passed the corridor bridge in thunderstorm weather, they had seen a golden carp coming out at the lower reaches of the bridge bottom. But some old people said that the size of the golden scale carp was just the length of the palm. Others said that the strange carp was very large, at least half a person long, and was almost refined. Opinions vary, and the old people argue so much that none of the children listening to the story is willing to take it seriously. At this time, the little girl stared at the bottom of the clear stream, holding her cheeks in her hands. The white-haired old man squatted beside her and said with a soft smile, "Miss, if the Lu family didn't lie, this great opportunity has fallen into someone else's pocket." The little girl turned her head and said with a grin, "Grandpa, maybe there are two." So she showed the funny scene of missing a front tooth. The little girl soon realized this and put her hand over her mouth. The old man held back his smile and explained, "The genus of Jian Lai, which has not yet walked the river, pays most attention to dividing the territory and does not allow the same kind to approach dot. So double quotes the little girl, turned her head again, held her cheeks in both hands in a daze and murmured, 'What if there is?' The old man, who has always been kind-hearted on the little girl's side, showed the look of dignified elders for the first time, reached out and gently pressed the girl's head, and said in a deep voice, 'Remember, Miss, this wording case is really the #1 enemy of our generation, and you must not take chances. You'll know your golden branch and jade leaf. Double quotes the little girl took out a hand, waved it hard, and complained, I know. Grandpa, my ears are going to cocoon." The old man said, "Miss, I'll keep an eye on what's going on there. Although the other party is our lie on the table of Jianyang Mountain. The character and conduct of that big family, well, let alone dirty the missus' ears." She just waved away. He had no choice but to leave. This burly old man, who is like a domestic slave, has his hands hanging down his knees. When walking, his back is slightly hunched, like walking with a load. The girl on the shore suddenly rubbed her eyes hard. She found that the water level in the stream clearly began to rise slowly, which was visible to the naked eye if she was outside the town, such as in Jianyang Mountain, or anywhere in her hometown. Even if the whole stream dried up in an instant, she wouldn't be surprised. The little girl wondered, doesn't it mean that all metaphysics, supernatural powers, and Taoism are naturally banned here? And the more advanced the cultivation is, the more powerful the counterattack is. Grandpa Abe said that even the legendary man has stayed here for a long time, and now it's almost the difficult situation of my Buddha Saba crossing a river. So it's difficult to really stop his starts to compete. She finally shook her head, too lazy to think about the puzzle. The little girl turned her head and looked at the tall figure of Grandpa Ape. She thought happily that when the ban was completely lifted here, she asked Grandpa Ape to move the peak called Pian Mountain back home as a little flower bed. After champing a return to the yard, his eyelids kept jumping. with his left eye jumping into wealth and his right eye jumping into disaster. So Chen Ping'an sat on the threshold and began to imagine that he was drawing a blank with his hands hanging in the air. Soon, the straw sandal boy entered a state of selflessness. Juvenile diligence is on the one hand, but it is also very important that this move can carry hunger. Therefore, Chen Ping'an has formed the habit of drawing blank when he has something on his mind. The most important thing about porcelain firing is God's will, because before opening the kill, no one knows whether the glaze color and shape of a porcelain finally fit the will of the people. So they can only listen to God's fate. However, before firing the kill, blank drawing is undoubtedly the top priority. However, Chen Ping'an is considered by old man Yang to be poor in qualification and mostly does manual work of map practice. Chen Ping'an can only observe it carefully next to him, and then practice mud and draw blank by himself to find the feel. The sound of firewood door opening sounded in the yard next door. Daughter turned out that Song Jigsan returned from the school with his maidservant Jigui. The handsome boy made a sprint and easily stepped onto the low wall. After squatting down, he loosened his palm. It was full of stones the size of fingernail, with various colors, such as lanolin, being green, white lotus root, and so on. This worthless stone, of various sizes, can be seen everywhere in the small town beaches. Among them, a kind of bright red stone full of chicken blood is the most pleasing. Mr. Dao Jesushu carved a seal for his disciple Zhao Yang. Song Jigsan thought it was very popular. He wanted to exchange things with that guy several times, but the other party refused to live or die. Song Jigsan threw a stone, which was not strong enough to hit Chen Ping'an's chest, but the latter was indifferent. Throw it again. This time, he hit the forehead of the straw sandal boy, and Chen Ping'an still stood still. Song Jigsan is not surprised that this dart it crackled and a handful of 7 or 8 stones fell out successively. Although Song Jigsan intended to strike Chen Ping'an, he still didn't directly hit Chen Ping'an's arms and fingers, because Song Jigsan felt that it was invincible. Song Jigsan lost the stone and patted the palm of his hand. Chen Ping'an breathed out, shook his wrist, ignored Song Jigsan, thought for a moment, lowered his head, and held the 5 fingers of his left hand like a knife. The skill of jumping knife is not a unique skill among the old kings in the town, but the skill of jumping knife of old Yao Tou will stretch out his thumb no matter who sees it. Lao Yao took several disciples and couldn't really satisfy the old man. When he came to Liu Xianxia, he thought he had found someone who could inherit the mantle. In the past, when Liu Xianxia practiced, Chen Ping'an would squat aside and stare hard as long as he had nothing on hand. Liu Xianxia has the best face. He only knows that Chen Ping'an has a tight mouth. He often uses Lao Yao's secret formula to frighten the latter. For example, if you want the part of the knife to be stable, your hand should not be rigid and stable. In the final analysis, your heart should be stable. However, when Chen Ping'an asked what is Shen Wen, Liu Xianxia was blinded. Song Jigsan looked at it for a while and felt boring. He jumped off the wall and entered the room. The maidservant Jigui stood by the wall. If she didn't stand on tiptoe, she would just show the upper half of her face. Even so, it was vaguely clear that the girl was a beauty. She thought for a moment, tiptoed on her heels, and looked around the poor boy. Finally, she found 2 favorite stones on the ground. One was scarlet and transparent, and the other was snow white. They were just discarded by her child. She hesitated for a moment, lowered her voice, and said timidly, Chen Ping'an, can you help me pick up those 2 stones? I like them very much. Chen Ping'an slowly raised his head. The movement on his hand did not stop. He was still very stable. His eyes showed her to wait a moment. Childish Gui smiled like the first green bud on the branches after spring. It was very beautiful, but the boy has bowed his head and missed the moving scene. The corners of her mouth were turned up, and her eyes were bright and colorful. It seemed that there were very tiny living creatures swimming leisurely in it. When Chen Ping'an stopped what he was doing and asked which the stones were, the eyes of the maid Jigui returned to normal. As always, soft as spring mud after the rain. Chen Ping'an picked up the 2 stones according to the direction pointed by her finger and walked to the wall. As soon as she raised her hand, the straw sandal boy had put the stones on the top of the wall. She picked up the stones and held them tightly in the palm of her hand. A person with a heart who deliberately seeks this object is looking for a needle in a haystack, which is difficult to meet in 10 years. Even if someone doesn't want to. It's like junk goods on the rotten street. It's all up to the mood. Chen Ping'an asked with a smile. Aren't you afraid of slugs blocking your door and scolding for a long time? She didn't admit that her son stole other people's things, but she didn't seem to have the cheek to deny the fact. So she smiled and didn't speak. There is a mother and son living in the Mud Bottle Lane. Their curse-fighting skills are invincible in the town. Only Song Jigson can fight with them. The children are particularly naughty. They hunt slugs all year round. They like to fish and pick up stones in the beaches. The fish they catch are kept in a large water tank, and the stones are stacked next to the water tank. Song Jigson likes to provoke this little prick. He goes to pick up a few stones every 3 or 5 times. He can see them in a day or two, but he can't stand it. Once the child confirms that he has less baby, he will blow his hair, like a small wildcat stepping on his tail. He could scold outside the hospital for an hour. His mother never advises him, but can stir up trouble. He deliberately found out that Songji's salary was the illegitimate son of the former governor. He was so angry with Songji's salary several times that he almost had to go out with a bench to fight. The Major Gui talked good and bad before dissuading him. Suddenly, a sharp voice sounded. Song Jigson, come and catch the traitor. Your maid is flirting with Chen Ping'an. It's obvious that they are in collusion. You don't care about your housemaid anymore. Maybe she will climb over the wall and knock on Chen Ping'an's door tonight. Get out quickly. Tut tut tut. Chen Ping'an's hands touched the little woman's face. And you see, Chen Ping'an is disgusting. Song Jigson didn't show up at all. He shouted directly in the room. What's this? I saw Chen Ping'an arguing with your mother last night. Him. Chen Ping'an pulled his claws out of your mother's collar. It's also your mother's fault. She's so spectacular and full. Poor Chen Ping'an is so tired that he's sweating. Someone in the alley kicked the gate of Song Jigson Hospital and said angrily, Song Jigson, come out and fight alone. If you lose, you give me Jigui as a servant girl and feed me a bed and wash my feet every day. If I lose, I'll give you Chen Ping'an as a worker. What's the matter? I'll ask you if you dare. Anyway, who dares a shrinking turtle in the house? Song Jigson said lazily. Go cool down. Your father and I turned over the yellow calendar. It's not suitable to beat your son today. Go can. You're lucky. The child outside the house pounded on the door. Jigui, how oppressive you are to follow such a coward young master. You'd better elope with Liu Xiaonyang anyway. The big fool looks at you like he's going to eat you. The Major Gui turned and walked to the house. Inside the house, Song Jigson was carefully wiping a green gourd, which was an old object of unknown age and one of the family assets left by the adult Song. Song Jigson didn't care at first, but later inadvertently found that the gourd burst every thunderstorm day. But after Song Jigson pulled out the cover, no matter how it waved and shook, nothing slipped down. Fill it with water and sand, and pour it out with water and sand. It's not much. Not much. Song Jigson really had no choice. In addition, once he was scolded by the naughty mother, who was cooking outside the door. One illegitimate son with a mother and no father. Song Jigson took a knife and chopped the gourd down. As a result, the young man was stunned. The blade had been turned over, and the gourd was still intact, leaving no trace. A letter burned by Song Jigson in his early years wrote, the gold, silver and copper coins moved by the government office to the courtyard ensure that your master and servant have no worries about food and clothing. In their spare time, they can collect some antiques that they like to see, and have the right to cultivate their temperament. Although the town is small, coarse grain can nourish their stomach, books can nourish their che, scenery can nourish their eyes, and solitude can nourish their heart. From now on, do your best to listen to the destiny of heaven. The hidden dragon is in the abyss, and there will be a blessing in the future. Although Song Jigson resents the man, he doesn't spend money. It's hard to be extravagant in a small town with simple folk customs. Over the years, Song Jigson really likes to collect drugs. There is a big box full of vermilion paint, all of which are eccentric things, such as green gourds and reeds. It's just that Song Jigsun has a mysterious intuition. There are a large box, a variety of things, and more than 30 objects. This gourd is the most valuable. And then there is a rusty purple gold bell. When it swings, it clearly sees that the pendulum is hitting the inner wall. It should have made a clear sound, but it is silent, which makes Song Jigsun both creepy and surprised. Finally, there is an ancient and simple teapot with the signature of mandrill. Song Jigsun likes the rest, which is not love at first sight. The child named Guken stood outside the door, shouting abuse, full of anger. Before long, the curse stopped abruptly. Then Chen Ping'an saw the guy suddenly push open the door of his yard. His face full of panic, bolt the door, squat by the door, wink at himself, and ask him to squat next to him. Chen Ping'an didn't know where he was, but the cat ran to the child, squatted down, and asked softly, "Guken, what are you doing? Has your mother been angry again?" The child sniffed hard. He lowered his voice and said, "Chen Ping'an, let me tell you. I just met a strange man. The white bowl in his hand can pour water all the time. Look, it's such a big bowl. I saw him pour water for an hour with my own eyes. The guy seemed to stop when he passed the entrance of our mud bottle lane just now. Didn't he see me? It's terrible. Double quotes. The child compared the size of the white bowl with his hands, then patted his chest and said with emotion, "It's really frightening." Song Jigsun's father, Chen Ping'an, asked, "You mean the storyteller under the locust tree?" The child nodded vigorously. "No, the old man doesn't have a few pounds in his hand, and I can't even lift it. But that broken bowl is really frightening. Frightening." The child suddenly grabbed Chen Ping'an's arm. "Chen Ping'an, I really didn't cheat you this time. I can swear that if I cheat you, Song Jigsun will die." Chen Ping'an raised a finger and made a silent gesture. The child shut up immediately. There was a sound of footsteps outside the door, gradually ringing and falling. One thing falls to another. The child, who was not afraid of heaven and earth, sat on the ground, stretched out his hand and wiped his face carelessly. His face turned white. It was obvious that the slug named Guken was really scared to death. The child asked coldly, "Chen Ping'an, isn't that guy going to my house? What should I do?" Chen Ping'an said helplessly, "I'll go back to your house with you." The child probably waited for Chen Ping'an's words. He suddenly got up, sat down decadent, and said with a sad face, "Chen Ping'an, my legs are soft and I can't walk." Chen Ping'an stood up, bent down and pulled the child's back collar, carried the child in one hand, opened the latch with one hand and walked out of the yard. The child's house was not far from here, and it was only 100 steps away. Sure enough, Guken saw that the old man was in his yard. His mother even took a stool for the old man. At that moment, the child felt that the sky had fallen. So he chose to hide behind Chen Ping'an and let the tall man go up. Chen Ping'an didn't let the child down and protected him intentionally or unintentionally. When the bare child Guken holds Chen Ping'an's calf, he is immediately full of pride for no reason. The old man didn't think about it. He sat on the bench and thought a little. The white bowl in his hand disappeared out of thin air. Guken's legs softened again immediately, and the whole person hid behind Chen Ping'an. Trembling, the old man looked at the rural woman with a surprisingly calm look, looked at the straw sandal boy with a frown, and finally said to the timid child, "Little boy, do you know what's in your water tank?" The child shouted behind Chen Ping'an, "What else can I have?" "The fish, shrimp and crabs I touched from the stream, and the loach and eel caught in the field. If you like it, take it away. You're welcome. The child's voice is getting lower and lower, which is obviously lack of confidence. The woman stroked her hair at her temples, looked at Chen Ping'an and said softly, "Peace." Chen Ping'an understood her meaning, rubbed Guken's head, and then turned and left, deep in the woman's eyes. She had a touch of guilt for the straw sandal boy. She abandoned her miscellaneous thoughts and turned to the old man and asked, this immortal teacher from a long distance, "Do you want to buy or rob this opportunity?" The old man shook his head and said with a smile, "Buy. I can't afford a dog grab. I can't grab it either." The woman also shook her head. "It used to be so, but it may not be so in the future. Upon hearing this, the old man, who was originally relaxed, suddenly waved his sleeve and pinched his fingers like flying. The old man sighed. Why so? The woman's face was cold and sneered. How many good people do you think there can be in this town? The old man stood up and looked deeply at the ignorant child. It seemed that he had made a big decision. His wrist shook and the white bowl reappeared. The old man went to the big half-man high water tank and quickly scooped a bowl of water with the water tank. Although the woman pretends to be calm, her palms are full of sweat. The old man sat back on the stool, waved the gherkin and said, "Little boy, come and have a look." The child looked at her mother and she nodded with encouraging eyes. After the child approached, the old man gently blew a breath on the water in the bowl, with ripples. The old man smiled and said, "Open your mouth." At the same time, the old man touched a local sleeve from the child, empty twist on both fingers, but no solid grip. The child gave a cry subconsciously. The old man bent his fingers and flicked, and the green local sleeve fell into the child's mouth. The child was stunned on the spot and found that there was nothing strange in his mouth. The old man didn't give him the opportunity to ask. Pointed to the white bowl held by the palm of his hand. Look carefully. Gherkin stared and looked intently. First, he saw an extremely small black spot, then gradually turned into a slightly eye-catching black line, and finally grew slowly, as if it had become a small earthy yellow larch, rolling happily in the ripples on the water surface of the white bowl. The child with the thick brain suddenly appeared and exclaimed, "I remember it. It's me from Changping'an." The woman slapped her son in the face and said angrily, "Shut up." The old man was not surprised by this and said calmly, "My generation of friars, in order to prove their longevity, they are rebellious. This competition is nothing. Don't be so nervous. It should be your sons. Can't escape. Shouldn't be that young man's and can't hold it. This child named Gherkin weighs less than 40 jin, but the weight of its root bone is unimaginable. Therefore, when the bowl-holding old man with magical powers made an exception to use his ancestral secret skills and weighed his bones, he naturally couldn't carry Gherkin. This is the premise of his admission. Otherwise, if a 3-year-old child crosses the market with money, isn't he looking for a dead end?" The old man smiled, but his eyes were cold. He said slowly, "Of course, even if it was originally the boy's. So what? Now if I sit down in person, it's not his." The child was silent and his teeth trembled. The woman was relieved that the old man put on his kind face again. "Boy, this bowl contains the whole river. Now there is still a small jar. From now on, you are my direct disciple. I am a true monarch, only half a step away from being the ancestor of Kaisong. Although I am the next pope. In short, you will naturally understand the weight of the words true monarch and Kaisong in the future." The old man left and said, "It will only be heavier than this bowl of river water." The child burst into tears. "It's wrong. It's Changping'an." The woman was so angry that she raised her arm high and wanted to teach the stupid son who was blindfolded by Lord. The old man waved his hand, smiled and rode lightly. "It's not all bad to have such a kind heart." The child lowered his head and wiped his tears and runny nose with the back of his hand. The woman looked quietly at the old man. The old man smiled knowingly and nodded at people in the same way. Everything is in silence. After the child raised his head, his mother and the halfway master who fell from the sky for no reason were already a faint smile. The child turned his head and didn't forget to close the gate when Changping'an left. The town is like a field of crops, catching up with the big year and the harvest season. However, some people, just a barnyard grass mixed in rice, have no second eye after being seen. For example, a straw sandal boy walking alone in the mud bottle lane.